The bank told me my dead husband never owed a single dollar. For 2 years, I had sent $500 every month because I believed I was paying off the debt he left behind. 25 payments, $12,500. Then one ordinary morning, a woman at the bank looked at his records and asked me a question that made the world go silent. What debt? My husband never had one. Before we begin, please subscribe and like this video. And tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I want to know how far this story travels, and if you have ever had a moment when you realized someone had mistaken your kindness for weakness, then stay until the end. Because this story is not only about what was taken from me, it is about what happened when the man who stole from a grieving widow realized she was no longer afraid of him. My husband Richard always said I worried too much. He would laugh whenever I mentioned some possibility that had not happened yet. He would tap his temple and tell me that I could find danger in a sunrise. Carol, you could worry about a clear blue sky. For 26 years, that was our pattern. I worried. Richard steadied me. He handled every detail that made our life function. The insurance, the retirement accounts, the taxes, the savings. The paperwork that collected in neat folders at the bottom of his desk drawer. I handled everything else. Our home on Maplewood Drive in Columbus, Ohio. The garden. The birthdays. The school events when our children were young. The doctor appointments, the dinners, the thousands of small things that build a life without anyone noticing. We were not glamorous people. We were not wealthy people. But we were steady. We had a paid-off mortgage. A small savings account. A modest life insurance policy. A home that held 26 years of memories in every room. And then one Tuesday morning, Richard died in our kitchen. He was 58. I was 54. He had been holding a cup of coffee when it happened. One moment, he was standing near the counter, telling me that he needed to leave early for work. The next moment, the cup shattered on the floor. Richard fell beside it. I remember the sound of the ceramic breaking. I remember the steam rising from the coffee. I remember kneeling beside him while my hands shook so badly that I could barely dial emergency services. The paramedics later said it was fast. They said he likely did not suffer. They called that mercy. But there is nothing merciful about watching the person you built your whole adult life around vanish in the middle of an ordinary morning. There is nothing merciful about waking up the next day and realizing you have become someone you never imagined becoming. A widow. The funeral was on a cold Thursday in October. His sister flew in from Phoenix. Cousins came from Pittsburgh. His older brother Gary drove down from Cincinnati with his wife Donna. Gary stood at the edge of every room. He did not cry much. He watched people. He watched the flowers. He watched the food table. He watched the family gathering around me. And he watched me. At the graveside, he put one hand on my shoulder and told me that if I needed anything, then I only had to call. I believed him. At the funeral reception, he asked careful questions. How are you managing the paperwork? Have you started going through Richard accounts? Do you know what the insurance will cover? Do you know where everything is? At the time, I thought he was trying to help. I thought he was being practical because someone had to be. I did not understand that some people ask questions because they care. And some people ask questions because they are searching for a door. The first weeks after Richard died were almost impossible to remember clearly. Grief is strange that way. You do 1,000 things. You answer calls. You sign forms. You choose flowers. You accept food from people who look at you with pity. You stand in rooms full of voices and somehow hear nothing. Then one day you realize 3 weeks have passed and you cannot remember how. I found Richard's desk in his office. Everything was organized. His folders were labeled in his neat handwriting. Savings, insurance, home records, taxes, retirement. I sat in his chair and opened every drawer. I expected to find secrets. Not terrible secrets, just the kind that married people sometimes keep without meaning harm. A small account I did not know about, an old bill, a forgotten obligation. But I found nothing alarming. The mortgage was paid. The credit cards had small balances that I paid immediately. The life insurance claim was moving through the process. The savings account was intact. I told myself that I would be all right. Then, the phone rang. It was 23 days after the funeral. I was standing at the kitchen sink, looking out at the bird feeder Richard had hung from the oak tree in our yard. The feeder was empty. I had not been able to bring myself to refill it. My phone showed an Ohio number. I answered. The man on the other end spoke with a calm professional voice, the kind of voice that makes you picture a man in a dark suit sitting behind a polished desk. Mrs. Whitfield. My name is Daniel Holt. I am calling from Heritage Financial Services. First, let me say how sorry I am for your loss. I thanked him. Then he told me why he was calling. He said Richard had opened a personal line of credit in 2019. He said the account had an unpaid balance. He said the balance was nearly $18,000. He said that because Richard had passed away, they needed to establish repayment arrangements with the estate. I remember pressing one hand against the counter. I told him I knew nothing about any account. He sounded patient. Too patient. He said it was common for spouses to maintain separate accounts. He said there was no need to panic. He said the minimum monthly payment to keep the account from going into collections was $500. $500? That number sounded enormous to me at the time. Not because I could not pay it, but because it was another crack in the life I thought I understood. I asked how much Richard owed. He repeated that it was just under $18,000. Then he said something that stayed with me for years. We understand, this is a difficult time. We simply want to help you resolve this responsibly. I should have asked for paperwork. I should have asked for an account number. I should have asked for the original contract. I should have asked why a company I had never heard of was contacting me after my husband died. But I had buried Richard 23 days earlier. His reading glasses were still on his nightstand. His shoes were still by the bedroom door. I still reached for him in my sleep. I was not thinking like a careful person. I was thinking like a frightened woman who did not want her dead husband's name connected to unpaid debt. So I asked him how to pay. He gave me a transfer number. He gave me a reference code. He told me to include Richard's name. That afternoon, I sent $500. I wish I could tell you that something felt wrong right away. It did not. That is the part people do not understand about fraud. The best lies do not feel like lies in the beginning. They feel like responsibility. They feel like fear. They feel like something you have to do before things get worse. The next month I sent another $500, then another. Then another. I wrote the payment into my calendar. I treated it like a utility bill, a burden. A painful reminder that I had not known everything about the man I married. I told no one. Not my children. Not my closest friend Patricia. Not Richard's sister. Not Gary. I was ashamed. I thought Richard had hidden something from me. I thought maybe I had failed him by not knowing. And every month, when I sent that payment, I told myself that I was doing the honorable thing. I was cleaning up what he left behind. For 14 months, I paid without asking enough questions. The man from Heritage Financial called every few weeks. He always sounded calm. He always said the account was in good standing. He always said I was doing the right thing. Whenever I asked about the remaining balance, he gave me vague answers. He said progress was being made. He said the payment arrangement was working. He said these things take time. But he never mailed a statement. He never sent an email. He never gave me a written update. I noticed it. Of course I noticed it. One evening, I sat at Richard's desk and looked through my transfer history. 14 payments. $7,000. Not one piece of paper. I remember staring at the screen and feeling a small, hard knot form in my stomach. I told myself I would call the next day and demand documentation. Then I did not. Fear does not always make you run. Sometimes it makes you wait. Sometimes it makes you avoid the very thing that could save you. I was afraid of hearing that Richard had truly left behind a debt. I was afraid of finding out that my marriage had contained secrets, so I continued paying. Month 15. Month 16. Month 17. By the second year, I had become used to the loss, not healed. No one heals from losing the person who made the world feel like home, but I had learned how to move through the house without collapsing every day. I started watering the garden again. I filled the bird feeder once in a while. I learned how to handle the accounts. I began to believe I could survive. Then, the real bank called. It was a Tuesday morning in March. 2 years and 1 month after Richard died. I was pulling weeds near the rose bushes he planted the summer before his death. My phone rang in my jacket pocket. The number belonged to First Central Bank, the bank where Richard and I had kept our accounts for more than 20 years. I answered because I recognized the number. The woman introduced herself as Susan Park. She said she was calling as part of a routine customer review. She was warm and unhurried. We spoke about my checking account, my savings account, a certificate of deposit that would mature soon. Then something made me ask a question. I still do not know what it was. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was Richard. Maybe it was simply that after 2 years, I had grown tired of living with questions. While I have you, I said, there is something I wanted to ask about. My husband passed away 2 years ago. I have been paying a company called Heritage Financial Services for a personal line of credit he apparently had. Could you tell me if there is any way to confirm the remaining balance? There was silence. Not a long silence, but long enough. Then Susan asked me to repeat the company name. I did. Heritage Financial Services. She said she would look into it. I heard keyboard keys. Then another pause. This time it was longer. Mrs. Whitfield, she said carefully, I am looking at your husband's full credit profile. I am not seeing an account with that company. I told her it was a personal line of credit. I told her the balance had been nearly $18,000. I told her I had been paying $500 a month. Then Susan said the words that changed everything. Your husband had no outstanding personal debt when he died. I stood in the garden with dirt on my hands. The wind moved through the rose bushes. A bird landed on the feeder. And I could not make sense of what I had heard. I asked her to repeat it. She did. Richard's credit report showed his accounts closed in good standing. There were no active lines of credit. There were no unresolved debts. There was no Heritage Financial Services. No debt. No account. No reason for me to have sent a single dollar. I told Susan everything. I told her about the man named Daniel Holt. I told her about the calls. I told her about the wire transfers. 25 transfers by then. $500 every month. $12,500. There was another silence. But this one was different. It was no longer the silence of someone checking records. It was the silence of someone realizing I had been targeted. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, I think you need to come into the branch. I do not remember ending the call. I do not remember walking back into the house. I only remember sitting at Richard's desk and opening my transfer history. One by one, I counted them. 25 payments. $12,500. Gone. The money had come from the savings account Richard and I had built over 26 years. The money I had protected because it made me feel safe. The money I thought would carry me through old age. I stared at the screen until the number stopped looking real. Then the next thought came. Slowly, coldly. Who knew enough to call me only 3 weeks after Richard died? Who knew I was alone? Who knew Richard handled the finances? Who knew I did not know every account? Who knew I would want to protect his name? Who knew I was scared? Who knew where our money was? I thought of Gary. I saw him at the funeral. Standing at the edge of the room, watching, asking questions. I thought about his visit after the funeral when he offered to help move furniture in the basement. I thought about Thanksgiving when he spent time in Richard's office while I was in the kitchen preparing food. I thought about the desk drawer, the labeled folders, the account records, the bank statements, the transfer information. Everything someone would need to make a lie sound convincing. I did not want to believe it. Gary was Richard's brother. He had held my hand at the graveside. He had hugged me and told me I was family. But sometimes the truth does not care what you want to believe. Sometimes it sits in front of you and waits until you are finally ready to look. I called Patricia. She had been my closest friend for 30 years. She had been my closest friend for 30 years. She had been at my wedding. She had held my hand in the hospital when Richard died. She had brought food after the funeral. When she answered, I said only one thing. I need to come over. She did not ask questions. She said she would put the kettle on. At her kitchen table, I told her everything. I expected her to tell me I was jumping to conclusions. I expected her to say that grief can make people suspicious. Instead, she looked at me with a kind of anger I had never seen in her before. "Someone stole from you," she said. I nodded. Then she asked the question that mattered. "What are you going to do next?" The next morning, I went to First Central Bank wearing my navy blazer. Richard always said I looked serious in that blazer. I brought every transfer record. I printed them in date order, 25 pages, 25 reminders that I had been fooled. Susan met me in a private office. She had already pulled Richard's complete estate file. She had verified his credit report through every major reporting bureau. Nothing. No Heritage Financial Services. No line of credit. No debt. I spread the transfer records across the table. Susan studied them. Then she noticed something. 24 payments had gone to the same receiving account, but one payment from month 18 had gone to a slightly different account. The routing number differed by one digit. I had not noticed until the night before. Susan photographed both records. Then she told me that the bank fraud department would investigate. She gave me the name of an investigator named Keith Dalton. She told me to file a police report. Then she said something that made my hands go cold. "This appears to be targeted fraud. Whoever did this knew exactly how to reach you and exactly what to say." Targeted fraud. The word sounded too large, too formal, too criminal. I told Susan that I had an idea who might be involved, but I did not say Gary's name. Not yet. I needed more than a feeling. I needed something real. After leaving the bank, I drove to the public library. I did not use my computer at home. I did not know whether that mattered. Maybe it did not. But after 2 years of being deceived, I suddenly wanted to be careful about everything. I searched for Heritage Financial Services. There was no legitimate company. No bank registration. No lending license. No business record. No office. No website. Nothing. Then I found a discussion thread from 2 years earlier. A woman in another state described receiving a similar call after her father died. The caller claimed he had left behind a private debt. The caller sounded professional. The caller demanded wire transfers. The woman had asked for documentation. The call stopped. I read her story again and again. One sentence felt like a hand reaching through the screen. "They know when you are grieving. They think grief makes you easy to control." That afternoon, I drove home and sat in Richard's office. I thought about Gary. Richard had never been close to him. They grew up together in Dayton, but adulthood had taken them in different directions. Richard once told me that Gary kept score, not money exactly, everything. Who had borrowed from him? Who had disappointed him? Who had received more attention? Who had been treated better? When their mother died, Gary challenged the will. He claimed Richard had influenced her. The dispute ended quietly, but Richard never forgave him for it. He told me once that Gary could smile while holding a grudge for 20 years. At the time, I thought it was just family bitterness. Now I wondered if Richard had seen something I had missed. The next morning, I called Gary. I kept my voice light. I asked about Donna. I asked about the weather. Then I said that I had been sorting through Richard's paperwork and the bank had flagged something strange. Gary went quiet. Only for a second. "What kind of thing?" he asked. I said the bank had some questions about wire transfers. I said it was probably just confusion. I said the fraud department had mentioned needing to verify a few details. There was silence. Then Gary said something that made the hair rise on my arms. "You should let the bank handle that, Carol. You do not need more stress." He did not ask what transfers. He did not ask who received them. He did not ask why the fraud department was involved. He knew. He knew exactly what I meant. When I hung up, I sat in Richard's chair without moving. It was not proof. Not yet. But it was enough to change the direction of everything. Gary was afraid, and if Gary was afraid, then there was something to find. I called an attorney named David Chen. Patricia recommended him because her nephew had used him during a difficult property dispute. David's office was near the State House. The room was simple. A desk. A wall of law books. A window overlooking High Street. He did not waste words. I liked that about him. I placed everything on his desk. The transfer records. The bank information. The library search. The notes I made after speaking to Gary. David listened without interrupting. Then he folded his hands and looked at me. What you have is concerning, he said. But concern is not evidence. We need documents that connect Gary to the receiving accounts. We need records. We need proof that will survive scrutiny. I asked how long that would take. He said weeks. Maybe longer. I thought about 25 months. I thought about every payment I made while someone laughed behind my back. I told him I could wait. We filed a fraud report with the Columbus Police Department. We filed a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General Office. Keith Dalton opened a formal bank investigation. David began the process of requesting records for the accounts that had received my money. For the first time since Richard died, I felt something close to direction. I was no longer simply surviving what had happened. I was moving toward the truth. Then 4 days later, Gary called me. It was 8:40 in the evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table. The sun had gone down. The house was quiet. I saw his name on the phone and watched it ring twice before answering. "Carol," he said. His voice had changed. The warm family voice was gone. "I heard you went to the police." I asked who told him. He said it did not matter. Then he said I was making a serious mistake. He claimed that he and Richard had an arrangement. Business between brothers. He said Richard owed him money from years ago. He said I did not understand the details. I asked why a legitimate debt required a fake company and anonymous account numbers. His voice became lower. He said if I continued making accusations, then he would sue Richard Estate. He said he had documents. He said he could drag the process to probate court for years. He said legal fees would consume everything I had. Then he said something that revealed more than he realized. "You have no idea what you are starting." I held the phone tightly. My heart was racing. But I made my voice calm. I said I would share his concerns with my attorney. There was silence. "Your attorney," he said. He had not expected that. "Good night, Gary," I said. Then I ended the call. For several minutes I could not move. I felt scared. I need to be honest about that. I was scared of the threats. I was scared of legal battles. I was scared that he might be able to twist the truth into something ugly. But beneath the fear was another feeling. Gary had just admitted there was something to hide. A man with nothing to fear does not threaten a widow for asking questions. A man with nothing to hide does not talk about forged documents before anyone mentions documents. I called David's emergency number. I told him everything Gary said. He told me to write it all down. Every word, every pause, every threat. So I did. 4 pages. Time of the call, exact phrases, his tone, the moments where his voice changed. Then I made copies, one for David, one for my records, one for Patricia, because I had learned something important. Silence protects the wrong person. For 2 years I had kept my fear private. I had kept the debt private. I had kept my shame private. And that privacy had made me easy to control. Not anymore. 10 days later, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. The caller introduced himself as Craig Morrow. He said he was a financial dispute mediator. He said Gary wanted to resolve the matter quietly. He offered $3,000. $3,000 for $12,500 stolen from me. In return, I would need to sign an agreement withdrawing every complaint. The police report, the Attorney General complaint, the bank fraud report, everything. I listened to the message twice. Then I forwarded it to David. He called me almost immediately. "This helps us," he said. I asked how. He said a legitimate mediator would contact my attorney. The call was not mediation, it was pressure. And pressure meant Gary was worried. I told David I would not accept it. $3,000 was not an offer. It was an insult. It was Gary trying to buy my silence at a discount. That Saturday, Patricia came to dinner. We ate pasta at my kitchen table. I told her every detail. The bank. The police report. Gary call. The threats. The mediator. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" I told her I needed someone who knew the whole story. Someone who had all the facts. Someone who would be there if anything happened. And I told her that if there was ever a hearing, then I did not want to walk into that room alone. Patricia looked almost offended. Of course you will not walk in alone, she said. That night we talked about other things. Her daughter, new house, her upcoming trip, a book she was reading, the kitchen faucet Richard had meant to replace for years. Ordinary things, small things. The kind of things that remind you life is larger than fear. After Patricia left, I stood near the kitchen window and looked out at the garden. For 2 years, I had believed grief had made me weak. But maybe grief had done something else. Maybe it had taken away the things I had once been afraid to lose. I had already lost the person I loved most. I had survived the day Richard died. I had survived the funeral, the silence, the empty rooms, the first birthday without him, the first Christmas, the first anniversary. After surviving all of that, I realized that Gary's threats did not have the power he believed they had. He saw a widow, he saw someone alone, he saw someone who would pay to avoid conflict. He did not see the woman who had spent 2 years learning how to stand on her own feet. He did not understand that grief had changed me. He was about to learn. They came to my house on a Sunday afternoon. Gary and Donna. I saw his dark blue truck pull up outside. I watched from the kitchen window as they walked toward the house. Gary wore a pressed shirt. Donna wore a neat beige jacket. They looked like people going to church. They looked like family members arriving with concern. I opened the door before they could knock. Gary said they wanted to talk face to face, like family. I let them inside. There are moments when you understand that a conversation will happen no matter what. And I would rather hear a lie in my own living room than on my front porch where neighbors could watch. We sat in the living room. I sat in Richard's armchair. Gary and Donna sat together on the sofa. I did not offer coffee. Donna began. She said they were worried about me. She said they were worried about me. She said the police and lawyers were making everything worse. She said Richard would not want the family torn apart. I said nothing. Gary leaned forward. He said he wanted to be honest. He claimed Richard owed him money. He said there had been a private agreement between brothers. He said the arrangement was informal because they trusted each other. He admitted he had handled it wrong. But he said he never meant to steal from me. I looked at him. Then, I asked him one question. If Richard owed you money, why did you create a fake financial company? Gary's jaw tightened. He said he had set up a separate account for convenience. I asked why he called me pretending to be an employee named Daniel Holt. Donna made a small sound. Gary said I was twisting things. I asked why he contacted me 3 weeks after Richard's funeral. I asked why he never sent documentation. I asked why he took money from me every month while telling me I was protecting Richard's name. The room went silent. Then Donna tried to speak. She said Gary's intentions were not bad. I looked at her. Her name was not on the account yet. I did not know that, but something about her silence told me she knew more than she wanted to admit. Gary changed his tone. He told me legal proceedings would cost me money. He reminded me that I was alone. He reminded me that my house needed repairs. He said he had resources that I did not have. Then he asked if I really wanted to spend my remaining good years in court. I stood up. Thank you for coming, I said. We are done. Gary looked surprised. He had expected tears. He had expected panic. He had expected negation. He had expected negotiation. Instead, I walked to the front door. He stood slowly. His face was red. Donna would not look at me. At the door, Gary turned back. You are making a mistake, he said. Good night, Gary, I said. Then I closed the door. The moment the lock clicked, my legs gave out. I slid down against the hallway wall. My hands shook, my chest hurt. I sat there in the silence and let the fear move through me. Then, something changed. The fear did not grow. It hit something inside me and stopped. Gary had come to my home. He had admitted the arrangement existed. He had tried to justify it. He had threatened me. He had done all of this because he was terrified of what the records would reveal. I called David. I told him every word. His voice became very quiet when I described Gary's admission. He told me to write it down immediately. Then he said something I will never forget. He is beginning to make mistakes, Carol. Let him keep talking. Weeks passed. The waiting was difficult. There were days when I felt strong. There were days when I woke up convinced that Gary would find a way to escape. There were days when I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. Then I would sit in Richard's office and remind myself of the truth. I had been deceived. Being deceived was not the same as being foolish. The blame belonged to the person who lied, not to the person who trusted. One Wednesday morning in June, David called. He asked if I could come to his office immediately. His voice was controlled, but I could hear something underneath it. I drove there faster than I should have. Patricia came with me. David was waiting in his office with a folder on his desk. He told us the bank subpoenas had returned. The receiving account was registered to a company called HFS Financial Holdings. The name sounded close enough to Heritage Financial Services to feel intentional. The company had been registered through a Delaware agent address, but the bank account had an authorized signatory. Gary W. Whitfield. Gary full legal name. His signature. His identification. His access to every payment I had sent. I stared at the page. I expected relief. Instead, I felt sick. Because proof does not make betrayal easier. Proof only makes it impossible to look away. Then David turned to the second account, the account that received the one payment with a slightly different routing number. There was another authorized signatory, Donna Whitfield. Gary wife. The woman who sat in my living room and told me she wanted peace. The woman who looked down at her hands when Gary threatened me. Her name was on the account. Her name was in the records. The betrayal was not one man. It was two people who had attended Richard's funeral. Two people who had watched me grieve. Two people who had smiled at me while accepting my money. I asked David what happened next. He said the evidence was strong enough to move forward. The fraud investigation would be referred for federal review because the scheme involved interstate wire transfers and false financial representation. He told me that Gary had a serious problem now. I asked if he knew it was coming. David said, Gary lawyer probably did. Gary probably did not. The hearing took place on a Wednesday morning. I wore the navy blazer. Patricia sat beside me. I could feel her steady presence without looking at her. Gary sat across the room with his attorney. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but the confidence was gone. The man who walked into my house and threatened me had disappeared. In his place sat a man who had been forced to see his own lies displayed in documents. The account records were presented, the credit report proving Richard had no debt, the corporate registration for HFS Financial Holdings, the bank signatures, my transfer history, the notes from Gary threatening phone call, the mediator voicemail, the account of Gary visit to my house. Gary attorney tried to call it a family dispute. He said the transfers were part of an informal personal agreement. Then he produced documents. 2 handwritten pages. They claimed Richard borrowed money from Gary in 2017 and 2018. The documents were notarized. For a few seconds I felt cold. Gary had promised he had documentation. Maybe he had prepared this for years. Maybe he had planned every detail. Then David stood. He asked permission to submit a forensic document report. The report showed that the paper used in the documents was old, but the ink was not. The ink had been applied recently, within the previous 12 months. Gary had found old paper and written new lies on it. He had believed that old paper would make the forgery look real. He did not know that experts could test the ink. I watched his face as the report was read. That was the first time I saw him truly afraid, not angry, not defensive, afraid. His attorney asked for a recess. The judge granted 10 minutes. In the hallway I heard raised voices from behind a closed door. I could not understand the words, but I knew what they meant. Gary was learning that the story he had built was falling apart. When everyone returned to the room, Gary looked different. He no longer looked like a man planning a victory. He looked like a man waiting for a door to close. His attorney said Gary wanted to speak. Gary stood. He said there had been confusion. He said his intentions had been misunderstood. He said he believed he was collecting a legitimate debt. The magistrate interrupted him. She told him that intent did not erase fraud. She told him that taking money through false representation was still a crime. She asked if he understood. Gary opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat down. I remember looking at him and thinking about every payment, every month, every $500, every time I told myself I was honoring Richard. Gary had counted on me feeling ashamed. He had counted on me staying quiet. He had counted on me being too exhausted by grief to fight. He had been wrong. The case moved forward. Federal charges were filed 8 weeks later. Gary faced charges connected to wire fraud and false documentation. Donna faced charges for receiving money through the secondary account. Gary hired a criminal defense attorney from Cleveland. There were motions, arguments, delays, attempts to exclude the document analysis, attempts to claim the transfers were voluntary, but the evidence remained. I had transferred the money voluntarily only because I had been lied to. A lie does not become legal because the victim believed it. Gary eventually accepted a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud. Donna pleaded guilty to a charge connected to her role in receiving funds. The day of sentencing was colder than I expected. I had been asked whether I wanted to submit a victim impact statement. I spent 2 weeks writing it, not because I did not know what I felt, but because I wanted every word to be true. I did not want rage to speak for me. I wanted the truth to speak. When the judge called my name, I stood at the podium. Gary sat across the room. He did not look at me. I began by speaking about Richard. I spoke about the man he was. The husband who fixed small things around the house, even when he claimed he did not know what he was doing. The man who planted roses he said would never survive Ohio winters. The man who filled the bird feeder every morning. The man who always made coffee before I woke up. Then I spoke about what Gary did. I told the court that money can be repaid, but 2 years cannot be repaid. The years I spent grieving. The years I spent believing I was cleaning up a debt my husband left behind. The years I spent feeling ashamed of a secret that never existed. I told the court that Gary did not just steal money. He used my grief as a tool. He used Richard's death as an opportunity. He stood at Richard's grave and held my hand while planning how to take from me. Then I said the words I had carried for months. I am not asking for vengeance. I am asking for the truth to be recorded exactly as it happened. I am asking for real consequences so that no one else has to learn this lesson the way I did. When I finished, the courtroom was quiet. Gary still did not look at me. The judge sentenced him to 14 months in federal prison. He was ordered to repay the $12,500 with interest. Donna received probation and a financial penalty. When the gavel came down, I expected to feel victorious. I did not. I felt something quieter, something deeper. It felt like an unfinished sentence had finally ended. Like a door I had been standing in front of for 2 years had finally closed behind me. Patricia put her hand over mine. She asked if I was ready. I said yes. We walked out of that courthouse together. The first restitution payment arrived 6 weeks later. I looked at the check for a long time before depositing it. I thought I would feel happy. Instead, I felt sad. Not because I did not want the money back. I did. But because the check represented something that should never have happened. No amount could restore the months I spent blaming Richard. No amount could give back the peace Gary stole from me. Still, I deposited it. Then I hired someone to fix the roof. I replaced the kitchen faucet Richard had planned to repair. And one morning, I filled the bird feeders. All of them. Spring came the following year. The garden bloomed. The roses returned. The lavender grew high near the path. I started taking watercolor classes on Tuesday evenings. I was not good at it. I painted skies that looked like spilled laundry detergent. I painted flowers that looked nothing like flowers. But I loved it. I loved sitting in a room full of beginners. I loved learning something with no pressure attached to it. I joined a fraud awareness group connected to the Attorney General office. I began telling my story to other people. Older couples, widows, caregivers. Anyone who wanted to know how these scams work. I told them to ask for documentation. I told them to never wire money because of an unexpected phone call. I told them to speak to someone they trust before acting. And I told them the most important thing. Do not let shame keep you silent. Shame is what scammers depend on. They want you to think you should have known better. They want you to hide. They want you to be too embarrassed to ask for help. Do not give them that power. I was 57 when I understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. Kindness is not weakness. Trust is not foolishness. And being alone does not mean you are powerless. Gary thought he had found an easy target. A woman who had just lost her husband. A woman who did not understand the finances. A woman who would pay anything to avoid trouble. But he made one mistake. He thought grief had broken me. He did not understand that grief had taught me what I could survive. I still talk to Richard sometimes. On quiet mornings, I sit near the garden with my coffee. The birds gather around the feeder. The roses move in the wind. And I tell him about the strange things life has become. I tell him that I learned the accounts. I tell him that I learned the accounts. I tell him that I fixed the roof. I tell him I finally replaced the faucet. Then sometimes I say something that makes me smile. Your brother thought I was easy. He did not know us very well. And maybe that is the lesson I want to leave with you. If someone has hurt you because they believed you would stay quiet, then remember this. You do not have to be loud to be strong. You do not have to be fearless to fight back. You only have to take the next right step. Ask the question. Save the message. Tell someone you trust. Keep the records. Do not let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is cruel. The truth may take time, but truth has a way of finding the people who thought they buried it. If this story moved you, please subscribe and like this video, and leave a comment with the city you are listening from. I read the comments and I want to know where this story reached you today.